Hey everyone, DB from Eat, Sleep, Cruise, and by now you've heard that the CDC has sent the major cruise lines a letter clarifying several of the recent clauses in the CDC's technical instructions that were released in early April. Now, many are touting this as a green light that will have cruising back up and running by mid-July. Of course, we're a little bit more skeptical that cruising will be able to resume so quickly. Why? Well, in this video, we take a look at several of the obstacles that still exist despite the CDC loosening some of its procedures, and we analyze whether it's really possible for cruising to begin in July from the US. Now, first off, we need to be clear that the CDC has not removed the Conditional Sailing Order. That framework is still in effect. While many have erroneously and quickly jumped to conclusions that cruising is back, of course, the situation is not so clear-cut. So we don't want to get our hopes up just yet that it's a slam dunk that the cruise lines will be sailing from the US this July. In fact, the CDC is still requiring cruise lines to follow the phased approach to resume cruising that is stated in the order. What the letter last week did, on the other hand, was provide some additional context and potential ways cruise lines can speed through that process. So it is offering cruise lines a means to more rapidly progress through the phases. Now, it's up to the cruise lines to decide whether they will take the CDC up on this proposal or continue working through the procedures as originally stated in the Conditional Sailing Order. Now, the biggest change that occurred with the letter was the ability for cruise lines to bypass the test cruise requirement. To skip simulated voyages, cruise lines will need to attest that 98% of its crew and 95% of passengers will be vaccinated. If this sounds similar, it's because the same proposal was put forth by Norwegian Cruise Line Holdings about 3 weeks ago. So we're very thankful that the CDC is recognizing that adding a vaccination requirement would allow cruise lines to more quickly resume passenger operations from the US. However, for cruise lines that cater more to families, or cruise lines that decide not to go the vaccination route, they still need to undergo the test cruise portion of the Conditional Sailing Order. On a positive note, the CDC did commit to reviewing plans for test cruises on a shortened timeline of 5 days versus the 60-day timeline outlined in the original order. So while they are altering provisions of the Conditional Sailing Order, they're still sticking to cruise lines needing to go through these additional hurdles. So for the cruise lines to be ready to set sail in July, they will need to ensure all crew are fully vaccinated. Given the shortage of vaccines around the world, this might not be as easy as it sounds. While some cruise lines have indicated they will vaccinate crew who are unable to get the shots in their home country, this would certainly delay the restart of cruising, as the crew would need to travel to the departure port, quarantine, then get vaccinated, then wait another 2 weeks to be fully inoculated. Now, 3 weeks ago, Norwegian Cruise Line Holdings came out and said they were ready to go with fully vaccinated crew and passengers for July 4th. Other cruise lines, like Royal Caribbean and Celebrity Cruises, are requiring adults to be vaccinated, but not those under 18. Now, those cruise lines are already setting sail from outside the US, with sailings from the Bahamas and the Caribbean starting in June. To sail from the US, those cruise lines would need to alter their plans, as the vaccine is only open for those who are 16 years and older in the US. Now, clinical trials are being run on children aged 12 to 16, and current estimates indicate that the FDA could approve vaccines for children that young as early as June. Still, even if it's approved for children that young, it would still need to be distributed and actually administered to children, and as we know, only about 30% of adults currently have been vaccinated. So it's unclear in what priority children will be placed to be vaccinated, even if the FDA approves it. Now, of course, if the cruise lines decide to wait until children can be vaccinated, this will certainly add extra time to the return of cruising and make it less likely that they'll be able to return to operations in mid-July. Now, within all these discussions, Carnival Cruise Line has been one of the only cruise lines who seemed like all along they were going to pass on requiring vaccines of passengers. They are one of the only major cruise lines to not announce a restart outside of the US in North America, and leadership of the cruise line and its parent company have made public statements indicating that most likely vaccinations will not be required to board their vessels. Now, with the CDC's letter, it's unclear if this new clarification impacts that decision. We believe it will certainly have them reconsider their position. as having the vaccination requirement would certainly improve the likelihood that they will be able to cruise sooner rather than later from the US. Even with the vaccination route providing a quicker means to resume cruising, there are still a number of health and safety protocols that need to be implemented on the ships. The cruise lines were given more relief with these new clarifications, and that they can enter multi-port agreements. This will make it easier for the cruise lines to meet the health requirements in quarantine procedures, as well as disembarkation of guests, in instances that COVID-19 is detected on a ship. Allowing groups of ports to share the responsibility and offer support services, medical supplies, and accommodations will make it more efficient for cruise lines to ensure that ill passengers will be treated and cruise ships will not be turned away from port to call like they were last spring. Still, the cruise lines need to get these agreements in place. It's unclear how eager the ports of call will be to agree to these new terms. Now, with the major cruise lines already sailing in the Bahamas and the Caribbean from departure ports outside of the US, there is an assumption that some form of agreement exists between these destinations and the cruise lines. Whether those current agreements include all the stipulations and clauses required by the CDC is not known. Further, how will the cruise lines even broker these deals? Will they do it by itinerary, by region? Cruises in the Caribbean and Bahamas can often visit 3 or 4 different locations, each with its own laws and agreements. So it'll most likely take time to get these agreements in place to satisfy the CDC. Of course, there's just the issue of lead time. Several cruise lines have indicated in the past that it takes anywhere between 60 to 90 days to get a ship up and running. Now, that is under normal conditions. With the new clarifications, the cruise lines do have a better sense of the requirements, but it's still unclear if they can implement all the changes in time to meet the mid-July date. We're highly skeptical the cruise lines could get approval from the CDC with all the changes and still be able to get cruises on their websites and booked for July. We're not saying it's impossible, just kind of unlikely. If you look at the current sailings planned for North America, many of the cruise lines sailing in June and July have already begun operations. These initial steps include having crew arrive in quarantine as well as preparing the ships. Royal Caribbean and Celebrity Cruises announced on March 19th that they would resume cruising outside the US beginning in early June. This was a timeline of approximately 3 months. In addition, Norwegian Cruise Line announced 3 ships would return to service on April 6th, with the first ship not departing until the end of July. Again, this is about 3 months. In fact, Norwegian Gem, which is planning to sail at the end of July, just left Miami 2 weeks ago to begin picking up crew and preparing to sail. So, the cruise lines would need to have already started preparations for July cruises from the US to be a reality. Now, it is possible they could speed up the process now that they know they can implement a vaccine policy that lets them skip the test cruise requirement. But the cruise lines would need to have the ships in US waters to begin implementing enhancement to facilities, as well as the structural changes that are necessary to comply with the Conditional Sailing Order. This includes getting the crew on board the ships to begin this work. And while many crew are probably eager to get back to work, there is still the issue of continuing COVID-19 outbreaks across the globe. Perhaps one of the most unfortunate developments is the current outbreak of COVID-19 in several parts of the world, such as India. For anyone who cruises, you know that many of the crew members are Indian or come from adjacent countries. So if those countries are undergoing a crisis right now with COVID-19, this means it'll be even more difficult for cruise lines to find staff to return to cruising. Current reports suggest that only about 2% of that country's population is fully vaccinated, which means it's unlikely that many of those who work in the cruise industry have received their shots. Vaccination status might not matter, as one cruise line has already begun turning away individuals from India. Royal Caribbean International decided last week that it was not going to allow any Indian crew members to board its ships at this time. The cruise line is currently in the process of staffing Anthem of the Seas and Adventure of the Seas for cruises coming up in May and June. Indian crew members, some that had already arrived at the ship's embarkation port, were turned away. While the cruise line did not make that decision lightly, in a letter to the affected crew, it did state that this quick change was based on different reasons that are often unplanned and beyond our direct control. So of course, reading between the lines, this abrupt cancellation certainly has to do with the current status of COVID-19 in the country. Given these flare-ups, it's possible that other cruise lines could follow suit and begin prohibiting crew members from certain parts of the world from coming back to work. If that is the case, it will become even more difficult for cruise lines to staff ships and return to service for mid-July. Of course, this situation is consistently evolving, And in the coming weeks, we expect to hear more from the cruise line executives and CLIA as they work through the concessions the CDC has made in its current letter. All the public statements to date have been positive, with cruise lines hopeful that this new guidance means that we're finally on a road to recovery and to a return to cruising. While many see a path ahead for cruising, there's still quite a ways to go before US-based cruises will start up again. Of course, stay tuned to the channel as we'll be bringing you all of the latest CDC cruise updates. If you found this video useful, we have tons of other videos on the channel that describe what cruising will look like during COVID-19. You can also check out our picks for the top 10 cruise ships to sail on when cruising resumes in 2021. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe down below and click the notification icon. That way you get updated each week when we put out brand new cruise and travel videos. You can also say hi to us all over social media at Eat Sleep Cruise, where we help you see the world one port at a time.